Okay, so we are going to continue with hopefully the rest of notes. Let's see. All right, so we're going to talk about the rest of the poisons that are fairly common and then how to test for them. So we're going to talk about a couple different categories of other types of poisoning. So botulism is the most poisonous biological substance known to humans. So this is botulinum toxin. So deadly that 1 gram of a crystalline toxin evenly spread out and inhaled could kill more than 1 million people. Okay, so really, really minute amount of it can kill a person. It acts as a neurotoxin, which means it paralyzes the muscles, causes irreversible damage to nerve endings, extremely deadly in small amounts, and causes painful spasms before death. So it's very, very painful because it's just all through your nerves. Can be found in contaminated foods such as canned vegetables, cured pork and ham, smoked or raw fish, honey and corn syrup. It's just about the way of like where they're from and how they're packaged. Basically, it is a toxin that's found naturally in the ground. High heat and acid can kill the bacteria and spores. So what's supposed to happen when we have these kinds of foods is they're supposed to be heated or have the acid added to make sure that those toxins weren't in it. So if that process wasn't properly done, then they could be canned and trapped in there. So botulism, source of trouble, low acid foods that were improperly canned is kind of how they normally happen. Trouble signs is clear liquids turn murky. The jars are cracked. Looser dented lids. That's why they tell you don't buy the ones that have looser dented lids. Swollen or dented cans. Why do I keep yawning? Like this. And an off odor. In the U.S., an average of 145 cases are reported each year. So it's not that many cases when you think about how many people it is. Of these, approximately 15% are foodborne, 65% are infant botulism, and 20% are from a wound getting infected. But still, I mean, with how awful it is, like you don't want it to happen ever. So these are kind of some of the symptoms over here: double vision, blurred vision, droopy eyelids, slurred speech, difficulty swallowing, dry mouth, or muscle weakness is kind of how it begins. Another one that is kind of the same thing, terrible bacteria that affects your nerves, is tetanus. I'm sure that one you've probably more likely heard of. You have your tetanus shots and you have to get boosters of those. So tetanus is also caused by bacteria. A similar one that's named, the deadly nervous system disease that causes violent muscle spasms. So kind of similar reaction. Responsible for 1 million deaths per year worldwide. So that one's a lot more, but only 5 deaths per year in the U.S. because of vaccinations against it. So mostly it's problems other places that don't keep up with their vaccines, but you do have to get your tetanus updated. So do make sure that you check that throughout your life, that you have you've gotten a recent tetanus shot, that you're up to date, because in other places that don't get it, I mean, it really does kill quite a few people, and it's very, very painful. Tetanus bacteria produces spores that primarily live in the soil or in the feces of animals. These spores are capable of living for years and are resistant to extremes of temperature. So if you've heard of you step on a rusty nail or something on accident and they say, oh, you got to go make sure you have your tetanus shot in check. It's not necessarily the nail. It's just the fact that if it's really rusty, that means it's been there for quite some time. And these bacteria spores are resistant to extremes of temperature. They're able to live on basically any surfaces for a really long time. So it could still be there. It's not that it always is in rust or something. Just rust means it's been there a while. And this bacteria can last a while. So it could be there. Here are some examples. So the rusty nail. Multiply and grow and release a neurotoxin. This neurotoxin blocks. I don't even understand. I wasn't yawning. Then I started this video and because of the talking, I'm yawning now. Blocks synaptic transmission. Neurotoxin spreads to the nervous system and blocks inhibitors, so the nerve impulses can't be stopped. So you're just feeling lots of pain. Some other ones that have been an issue is all things that have to do with pesticides. Pesticides are also generally a neurotoxin. So all these are very, very painful, just pain all over, anything that affects your nerves. A pesticide is any substance used to control pests. So pests may be a target of insects, vegetation, fungi, etc. Most control the pests by poisoning them. So it is poison. Now it's generally low doses of this poison because it's trying to kill little tiny insects, but still it can bioaccumulate over time. So unfortunately, pesticides can be poisonous to humans as well. Some are very poisonous or toxic and may seriously injure or kill humans. Others are relatively non-toxic, depends on which one. Pesticides can irritate the skin, eyes, nose, or mouth. The most important thing to remember is that you should always use caution whenever you work with a pesticide. So if you do this on your own, like, you're trying to get rid of ants or weeds in your yard, stuff like that, you do need to be really careful with these pesticides. It's a poison. You don't want it on you either. If you're eating all these crops, so we put pesticides on basically almost all of our crops. You need to wash them off. That's why we wash our fruits and vegetables. It's one of the reasons, is to wash off the pesticides. There are 3 specific ways in which pesticides may enter your body. So dermal exposure means it's touching your skin. So you touch it. Inhalation, whether as dust, spray, mist, or fumes, pesticides can be drawn into your lungs as you breathe. So if you're like spraying it, obviously you can breathe it in. Ingestion, so pesticides can enter the body through your mouth, meaning you eat something that had it on it. So all of those would be common. Each pesticide is classified into a toxicity category and given an associated signal word that must appear on every product label so that the pesticide user can be alerted to how acute this toxic, how acute the toxicity is. So the signal word is this: so danger, poison, skull and crossbones, and they have a warning, and then caution, caution. So danger and warning would be the most thing to worry about. To figure out the acute inhalation toxicity of a pesticide, scientists add a known amount of pesticide to the air. The amount that causes half the animals to die is called, actually, I usually call it LD50 and LCs, but it's lethal concentration, or if it's LD50, that's lethal dose, like lethal dose is 50. So it's kind of how we tend to base how toxic something is if you give it to a population, what limit would kill half the population? So we don't generally test poisons for like what would kill all of them, because people have different metabolisms, people have different backgrounds, people have different things that they take. We don't test this on people anyways. We test it on populations of rats. But if it kills half, we're like, okay, that's its toxic level, because that's a lot for it to be killing half. Just a little kind of trivia about pesticides. We actually had a pretty big issue with this in our country. It still is in other places, of using too harsh of pesticides and it getting into our food and our water supply. One that was really big here was called DDT. It's still used in other places. It's not allowed to be used here now. But it's like all the other pesticides, it interferes with your nerves. So your movement of nerve impulses and muscular contractions, anxiety, seizures, twitching, rapid heart weak, muscle weakness, sweating, salivation, diarrhea, tearing, coma, and death. Okay, so really bad. Prior to 1972, when it was used, so prior to 1972, when its use was banned, DDT was commonly used as a pesticide. So before 1972, it was used all over the place, and it caused a lot of environmental damage, a lot of damage to like animal species as well as to people. One of the like popular stories is the bald eagle. So the bald eagle is like our national bird. And it just so happened that it would eat, like all the things that the eagle eats had DDT in their system, because they were eating smaller rodents that had DDT in their system from eating plants that had been sprayed with DDT. So it was like the plants had DDT on them. Then the rats eat the plants. Okay, so now the rats have more DDT in them than there was on the plants, because they're eating lots of plants. So they're getting all that DDT. Then a snake would eat rats. So the snake would eat several rats, and those rats had higher levels of DDT than the plants did. So now the snake has higher level than the rats did. And then a bald eagle would come down and eat the snake that's eating the rat that's eating the plant. So just the poison would keep bioaccumulating, is what that's called, is bioaccumulation, to where the bald eagle was the one that was getting such a high level of poisoning that it really affected it. And it was causing its reproductive systems to not work correctly. And its eggs, all the eggs that the bald eagles were laying, wouldn't harden. So basically their eggs would just break open, and none of their babies were making it to hatch. So our populations of bald eagles like almost died out. We almost killed the bald eagle with DDT. We realized what was happening. It was banned, and the populations have gotten back to a safer level. But yeah, just oddly, almost killed our national bird with DDT. And it did have a pretty kind of same thing with humans. It was causing male infertility, miscarriages in women, and the nervous system and liver damage. So we were spraying it on everything. It was and in high amounts, and we were spraying people. We were worried that people would get mosquitoes or lice, and we'd literally just spray it directly on people, which is bad. It was way too high of a concentration. You need to be much safer with things that are poison, like it's meant to kill things. Next on the list, things that have been a big problem is heavy metals. Okay, so heavy metals have been one of the biggest problems with suicides and homicides throughout history. The most common poison is arsenic. We talked about that earlier. So arsenic is the most common, and it's a metal. That's what it is. It's a poisonous metal. Lead and mercury have also been very involved in poisoning lots of people from a long, long time ago. So lead causes nausea, abdominal pain, insomnia, headache, weight loss, constipation, anemia. You can read a lot of these into seizure, coma, death. Mercury, acute poisoning from inhalation causes flu-like symptoms and muscle ache, stomach upset. Chronic poisoning causes, that means you take it slower, causes irritability, personality changes, headache, memory and balance problems, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting. Long-term exposure can cause death. So a lot of times people will kind of go crazy with lead and mercury. They poison the mind for sure. So if they're being slowly poisoned by it, they tend to have a lot of mental deterioration. So some heavy metals such as cobalt, copper, iron, manganese, and zinc are essential to health in trace amounts. Others are non-essential and can be very harmful to health in excessive amounts. So cadmium, antimony, chromium, mercury, lead, arsenic, these last three being the most common in cases of heavy metal toxicity. Not good for us. So here's just some examples. The easiest screening process for heavy metals is a hair analysis, actually. So to see if someone has had too much of that metal or has been poisoned with it, and it's usually easiest to be found in their hair. It holds it the longest. Heavy metals charge neurotoxic effects. So these are just some things that have been known to have these inside of them that have been known to cause problems when people were using them or around them too much. All right, then we have some poisonous gases. So hydrogen cyanide. Hydrogen cyanide is a toxic liquid colorless gas. It is found in smoke or various tobacco products that you're smoking and released by combustion of nitrogen containing organic materials. So it's just been used a lot in mostly war. So like gas chambers, throwing gas at people to poison them. It's been used a lot more in warfare. Carbon monoxide. This is a common one that people die from on accident. So a big one for accidents. It comes out of our car exhaust. So if you haven't had the privilege of having like a garage and parking in a garage before, maybe you don't know. I know I actually didn't know this stuff as an adult because I never had a garage till I was an adult. If you park your car and you leave your car on and you close everything down, so you're all closed up in your garage and you leave the car on, your car exhaust is putting out carbon monoxide. Well, it can't really escape very well. So it's filling up the garage, the small room you're in, with carbon monoxide. It doesn't take that long for a person breathing that to basically fall asleep, and they would die in their sleep. So carbon monoxide poisoning symptoms, you start feeling these kind of things. And if it happens too fast, you just lose consciousness, which is usually what happens in those kind of situations. There's a lot of people that have carbon monoxide leaks in their house. Sometimes you should have fire detectors that detect for that as well. But that's been a problem. It used to be a bigger problem. The way we build homes now, it isn't as much of an issue. But back before, the way we had our gas and cooking things set up, carbon monoxide poisoning happened a lot accidentally in homes. So we have some bioterrorism agents, so some things that have been used for terrorism. I just kind of have some like stories about them. So ricin, derived from beans of the castor oil plant. So they're just from a plant. They look like that. Lethal in humans in very small quantities, enters the cells of bodies and prevents them from making necessary proteins, causing cell death. Victim dies within a few hours. There's been a couple different poisonings throughout history of like famous politicians and things where they were injected with ricin. In April 2013, envelopes that primarily tested positive for ricin were intercepted at the U.S. Capitol's offsite mail facility in Washington, D.C. According to these reports, the envelopes were addressed to the office of Mississippi Republican Senator Roger Wicker and President Barack Obama. So during President Obama's administration, there were letters being sent. Now they were confiscated, and they caught the person who sent the ricin letters, but there was ricin inside the letters to try to poison him. Anthrax is another one that has been used. It's another one that's a common bacteria. It's made from this process here. Spreads to human from infected animals, can enter the body by inhalation, ingestion, and skin absorption. It's the worst when you inhale it, but you can just be around it, touch and eat it, and feel bad. Anthrax is found all over the world. It contaminates the ground when an infected animal dies. There aren't any known cases of anthrax passing from one person to another, so we don't think it's contagious. In 2001, shortly after the terrorist attacks on 9/11, so the Twin Towers going down, 22 letters laced with anthrax were sent in the U.S. mail. 5 were actually killed. So in this case, the terrorist attack did actually kill people. 5 were killed and 17 were sickened in what became one of the worst biological attacks in U.S. history. Basically, they would have the fine powder of anthrax inside these letters. So when the people opened it, it immediately puffed out, and they inhaled the powder, which is the most lethal way for anthrax to get into your system. So they're kind of showing you where they're at, and you can even look up what the letter said. It's very sad. It was just part of that whole, it went with the 9/11 catastrophe. Let me see how many. Okay. I'll try to just run through these because I don't want to do notes again. So tests for toxins. That's the last bit we have to do is go over tests for toxins. So at the scene, collection of drug evidence. I'm trying to decide. That's actually what I want to do. Yeah. Okay. So collection and preservation of drug evidence, field examination of substances to determine if drugs are present. So when you get to the scene, we think we have drug evidence, but we need to test it to see what it is. Package must prevent loss or contents or the cross-contamination. So generally, original container usually is a good package. Volatile substances may be packaged in airtight container. So volatile means it's evaporating quickly. So it's like a liquid. They want it to be in an airtight container. So we're holding that all in, not letting it be evaporated. Mark packages with enough information to ensure identification by the officer in future legal proceedings and to establish chain of custody, like all other things you would confiscate. Supply any background info regarding the drug's identity of how you found it. Now, some of the tests for toxins. So the lab handles an analysis of marijuana, other drugs, and prescription medications, which may be involved in criminal cases. By means of chemical tests, most controlled substances are common drugs and can be identified pretty easily. There exists a huge range of tests for the detection of certain substances, but to conduct all of these tests to determine the identity of a substance would be time consuming. So usually we just do presumptive tests to start. So we've talked about this before, like luminol. If I think there might be blood in an area, I would spray some luminol to do a presumptive test before I start, collecting everything and taking it. So if it glows in that one little area, I'm like, oh yes, this is blood here. So I'm going to collect things around it and actually take the time, collect the evidence, send it off to the lab. Whereas if I do this little quick presumptive test, if it doesn't turn the right color, then that's not the drug it is. And I don't need to do all this work for no reason. There's a lot of things that are like, there's a lot of drugs that are like white powder. There's a lot of drugs that are in pill form that could be a lot of other things. So a presumptive test does not positively identify the substance, but it does narrow down the possibilities of like, well, it's only going to be in these categories if it has the specific color change. So like this bag is a bag for trying to detect ecstasy, and it would turn blue. So here's some pictures of some different color tests. There's a lot of them. Usually this is something that like police officers would have on hand. Like they would have some that they could just bring in on site and be like, and just do a little quick check. If it turns the color that we think it could turn, then that's when they're going to send it off and send it to the lab. So if you had heroin and turned this color, you can see there's like, it's all different. This one goes from blue to pink and then back to blue, and that's telling you it's cocaine. Test for these, test for these. They're all color changes. So presumptive screening is rapid and fairly inexpensive. So you can know right away if this is something that you were pretty sure it's a drug, then you're going to send off for more testing. So if the screen is positive, it needs further testing, like I just said. So you're going to get you want more testing to have a confirmation. While presumptive screening test gives us positive or negative result, it does not tell me how much drug is in the sample. This means you cannot tell when, how much, or exactly when the drug person has taken it, if it's like a urine sample. This can only be done with a confirmation test. So some examples of some confirmation tests are here. Color tests, microcrystalline tests, thin layer chromatography, gas chromatography, spectrophotometry, neutron activation analysis. So there's higher level tests we could do to give more accurate of what it is and how much it was. So here's some examples of like actually good color tests. So they've used turn a color like that is what it is. So the Marquise test turns purple in the presence of heroin, morphine, or opium, turns orange-brown in the presence of amphetamines. So if you want to test for amphetamines or heroin, morphine, or opium, you would use the Marquise test. The Scott test, 3 solutions, blue, then pink, then back to blue, tells you it's cocaine. Can't ever say this one. Quinones Levine test for marijuana if it turns purple. Microcrystalline testing identifies a drug by using chemicals that react to produce characteristic crystals. So drop of the chemical reagent added to a small quantity of the drug you want to test. The crystalline precipitate forms. Each type of drug has an individual crystal pattern you can see under polarized light. So they literally, each drug will crystallize in a different way. And you can tell by looking at like comparison photos. Chromatography. So I'm pretty sure we've talked about chromatography before, but you can separate lots of things with chromatography. It separates things that are mixtures, so it can separate a mixture out into its parts. So if you think it's a type of drug that has several types of chemicals in it, we could separate it out and match it to the drug we know has those same chemicals. Mass spectrometric analysis for drug analysis. So you can run it through a machine and it can actually tell you what was in it exactly and how much amount was it. So forensic toxicologists perform on bodily fluids, tissue samples to identify any drugs or chemical present in a body of victims or suspects. They're not always looking for the exact chemical, but sometimes they're looking for a thing called a metabolite. So metabolite is the desired chemical that happens as your body is like processing. So example, when you inject heroin and they tried to find that in your urine sample later, you're not going to have like the exact chemical of heroin left over. Your body has broke it down into pieces and it actually turns into morphine within seconds. So what they're actually going to look for in the bloodstream or in the urine sample is morphine, not the chemical structure of heroin. So first, kind of your questions would be, is a drug or poison present? What is it? How much of the substance is present? Is the concentration in the body sufficient to cause death? And then how was the drug administered? So how did they get that drug into their body? That would be what we would want to know for sure to go forward with the case. An autopsy, also known as a post-mortem examination, may also be needed. We're going to learn more about autopsies at our next unit, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it right now. But they'll collect body fluids. They can collect organs, things like kidneys, livers, anything that might have had a lot of that drug within it. And that can be sent off to the toxicology lab to test. And there we go. I'm in the way.